Welcome to episode 26 of the Detour 365 podcast. This is William, the host. This evening I will be joined by Bill and Nathaniel as we discuss Genesis chapter 6, continuing with our Humanity of God series, looking at the events that happened right before the flood. God noticing this man named Noah and his righteousness in his generation, and also the reaction that God has to how things are going on earth. And again, this is right before the flood happens, and this is after the events that we discussed last week. We talked a little bit about Noah, mainly focusing on Enoch last week. So we'll be looking at the events before the flood in this episode, and this is part one of our look at the account of God and God's relationship with Noah. Next week we will be looking at the events during the flood, as it has to do with this series that we're in. And we hope you enjoy this content, and thank you for listening. So this is episode number 26. We're looking at the life of Enoch and the events that preceded the corruption and the wickedness of the humans that we're about to see here. We were talking more about the Watchers, the angels, that had impregnated the human women, and it's kind of a fascinating story that all that they were doing, and kind of the I guess the prequel to this. And so the Watchers, or the angels, whatever you want to call them, took human wives. They spawned the Nephilim, who were these kind of monstrous creatures, caused a lot of problems, and also had a lot of power and abilities. And then these Watchers, as they're called, taught, and this is according to the book of Enoch, because we did look at the book of Enoch some last time, that kind of fills in some of the gaps that are in Genesis. Of course, we're sticking with Genesis as like the primary source, but we were looking at the book of Enoch, and it tells how these Watchers taught humans this different kinds of new technology, but without the wisdom of how to use it. So this included weaponry and the forging of metal weapons and implements, and the ability for women to put on makeup and change their appearance and be more seductive, and then also the signs of nature and astronomy, and also deception, how to, I mean, we can kind of see how some of these could lead to the progression of things getting a lot worse on Earth, especially the weaponry. And because if you think about it, everybody would have had, the humans would have just been able to kill each other more at greater numbers. And any of these technologies, just like almost any technology, if you don't have the wisdom of how to use it for good, then it can easily be something that causes sin and corruption, and it just makes you have a greater ability to do these things. And so we could also see that, and I see a connection back to the garden also. I don't know if we mentioned that, just that original sin of pride, because the humans receive this technology and these abilities from the angels, and they allowed themselves to be corrupted. So that they kind of wonder why God is judging the people, so the humans here in the story of Genesis 6, so harshly. Um, but in a way, I see it as kind of going back to that original sin of pride. This wanting to be like God or have God-like abilities, but not wanting to have a connection or relationship with God, not seeking God's wisdom of how to live and how to use it. Um, so we get kind of more of the idea in the book of Enoch, that they were given this tech, and that it kind of accelerated this corruption that we're seeing here. And also we can see a lesson in this for today. So this is different from the original fall. Of course, this is a second. You can kind of see it. I kind of see it as a second fall. You had the fall that occurred in the garden at the beginning of Genesis. And now you have this, and as we will see here, it gets quite a reaction from God in chapter 6 of Genesis. And that's really the subject of what we're talking about this time, because we're looking at the humanity of God, and we see the emotions of regret, sadness, perhaps anger here. So Bill's going to read Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 through 19. And which version are you reading? Are you reading your favorite or your not
I'm
favorite?
I'm going to read my favorite, the Complete Jewish Bible.
There he goes.
Adonai saw that the people on earth were very wicked, that all the imaginings of their hearts were always of evil only. Adonai regretted that he had made humankind on the earth. It grieved his heart. Adonai said, I will wipe out humankind, whom I have created, from the whole earth, and not only human beings, but animals, creeping things, and birds in the air, for I regret that I ever made them. But Noah found grace in the sight of Adonai. Here is the history of Noah in his generation. Noah was a man righteous and wholehearted. Noah walked with God. Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was corrupt before God. The earth was filled with violence. God saw the earth, and yes, it was corrupt, for all living beings had corrupted their ways on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all living beings has come before me, for because of them the earth is filled with violence. I will destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. You are to make the ark with rooms and cover it with pitch, both outside and inside. Here is how you are to build it. The length of the ark is to be 450 feet, its width 75 feet, and its height 45 feet. You are to make an opening for daylight in the ark 18 inches below its roof. Put a door in its side and build it with lower, second, and third decks. Then I myself will bring the flood of water over the earth to destroy from under heaven every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will be destroyed. But I will establish my covenant with you. You will come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. From everything living, from each kind of living being, you are to bring 2 into the ark to keep them alive with you. They are to be male and female.
Very good. And I'm going to read a little section from Book of Enoch, actually, making an appearance again. And depending on how you kind of parse out the chapters, looks like it's chapter 10 of Enoch, 1 Enoch. Then the Most High, the Holy and Great One. This is written, looks like in like King James English or something. Spake. The Holy and Great One spake and sent Uriel to the son of Lamech and said to him, Go to Noah and tell him in my name, hide thyself, and reveal to him the end that is approaching, that the whole earth will be destroyed and a deluge is about to come upon the whole earth and will destroy all that is in it, and instruct him that he may escape and his seed may be preserved for all generations of the world. And just a side note on the event of the flood. We're kind of talking about the stuff, of course, that happens before the flood this time. One kind of commonality that the traditions of cultures around the world have in their history is that there is a flood story, a catastrophe, and it's a flood, and so I've always found that interesting, intriguing that there's a flood story there, and
Well,
especially what's that?
I also agree. Also, I think can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. I mean, according to all accounts of where human beings developed, it was, a couple of different river valleys, which I believe did flood on a regular basis. So floods would be integral to early human civilization, I would think.
And a lot of them kind of trace back to a similar time period, like what we would think would be the end of the Ice Age.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. That's just a side note. That's not in my notes. I just remembered I would have put it in there, but it's something interesting to look at, and it's been talked about by people other than us. So, I have a few select verses that I wanted to highlight, and of course, I have points here to share about all these, but these are kind of the verses that show, and there are many verses in here that show the humanity of God, as we so and I'm going to talk about this, that is it human? And I know we've talked about this before a little bit. God showing emotion, or appearing to show emotion in the Bible, in particular in the Old Testament. And I've had some thoughts on that, or at least some thoughts on that general subject that have come to me this week that I'll share. But I'll share these verses first. So the first one is verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Of course, that's not necessarily that profound, maybe, but it still shows that God is, this idea of God actively observing, but also that there's there's wickedness and then there's greater wickedness. So that's a little, just kind of like the Sodom and Gomorrah story. They were really wicked cities.
Well, I mean, but every time in the Bible that it might say something like God saw or God observed or any of that, that indicates that in that moment he's not all knowing, because
Well,
you had
and
to like choose to pay attention to gain that knowledge. Then you
well,
already had
there's I have some points related to that, so we will get to that. There's a way in which I believe God is, and it has to do with God being, of course, outside of, above time, but also interacting with us in, we're kind of in time, so to speak, when we're in this physical body, and God is interacting with us in time, but God is also above time. And, there's but we'll get to that here in a little bit. So the verse 6 is it said the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart.
well,
So that's a really intense one there.
yeah.
In verse 7, it says, the Lord said, I will blot out man who I've created from the face of the land, man and the animals, and the creeping things, and the birds of the heavens. So for I am sorry that I have made them.
Regret.
And verse 8 is Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And verse 9 is Noah was a righteous man. Of course, he wasn't perfect, but he was judged to be righteous, blameless in his generation. And then verse 13, God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them. So I have determined, so that speaks of a decision that was made there.
I think that blameless, I think I mentioned this last time, but that blameless in his generation thing speaks to a very important concept in my mind, or a concept which is in my mind very important. That like in his generation, just kind of pointing towards the fact that, well, the common phrase is somewhat like no man is an island, but that's kind of a misuse of that term, but for that phrase, but just that we are products of our environment. And I think it's to much greater extent than people really want to think about. They don't want to think about the fact that people in the past were products of their environment, and they don't really want to think about the fact that they are products of their environment, because it kind of removes your individuality in some sense to do that in the near term, or to do
Well,
that
at least it's the path of least resistance. And, it's hard, like in Noah's case, he stood out and kind of went against the current, at least.
But it still doesn't remove you from like the responsibility for the effects of your actions and such.
No, but it does. I do think
it would be easy to lean on it as a crutch, but it's still true. As always, things are a compromise.
I mean, we do know that God sees what we go through. What's that?
Noah was relatively unique in his generation because, well, starting there in verse 5, Adonai saw that the people on earth were very wicked, that all the imaginings of their hearts were always of evil only. And then we see Noah, who was considered to be righteous and walked with God. So Noah was different, really different among the people among whom he found himself.
Gotcha. the phrase imaginings of their hearts, what is that? Because I could interpret that two different ways, like your actual desires or like the thoughts that occur to you or the thoughts and fears that occur to you.
I could say pre-meditations, like what you want to do, and if you had the ability to do it, you would do it.
Hmm. Well, because he didn't say desires of their heart. It just he did label it imaginings, right?
Yeah. Because there are people who might appear good from the outside, but they have inner desires that if they had the ability to,
Well, I think to some extent that's everyone.
mm, not necessarily.
No, but we've I think we've all had imperfect thoughts before that we have not acted upon.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm getting at here is that they would act upon it, but the only reason they are not is because, like, let's say,
Not an internal sense of morality, but an external.
let's say they really hate somebody and they want to kill them for whatever reason, but they're very feeble and weak, so they're kind of a people pleasing kind of person, but they're only doing that because they know that, you know, this is like an extreme example, but
Hmm.
they might have the appearance of being a nice person and being friendly, but they're only doing that because they can't be assertive and
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
It
So it's
does.
not real like morality necessarily. It just has the appearance,
That's an
you know.
interesting topic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's something I have thought about because I guess people pleasing is probably a common one. Are you? Because I believe
How
God
much of
calls
our
it.
how much of
Uh,
our internal sense of morality is created by an external source when we were very young? I mean, almost all of it, right? So it's kind of that's a tough one. A bit.
well, and I mean, and you could imagine Noah growing up and in that environment, yet he still was different. Uh,
Yeah.
so that's even more kind of astounding. Um, and we don't. It doesn't say a lot about his family. I mean, it mentions there's a story about Shem, Ham, and Japheth after the flood. There's stuff that happens. Spoiler alert: they make it through the flood, all right, but um, we don't really know, that much about the righteousness of Noah's wife or his sons' wives that much, aside from, that little episode after the flood where Shem and Japheth did the right thing and Ham didn't do the right thing in that instance. Um but nonetheless they are saved with Noah because they're Noah's sons and
Yeah.
his offspring. Um, so that's kind of an interesting, just because Noah was righteous, all these people and us too today, if we look at, if he's the common ancestor as it says, um, you know, we benefited from that also, So
Hmm.
um, interesting thought though. Um, I do find it also kind of well, uh, I will establish. Did I read that? I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come to the ark, you, your sons, your wives. Okay, yeah. So that was related to that verse 18. So that just goes with the whole setting apart. And then I was kind of struck by that phrase in the book of Enoch where God sends the angel to tell Noah, hide thyself. Uh, so we don't know exactly if he was building the ark like in full view of everybody or if he was off somewhere building it.
Yeah.
Well, it would kind of be hard to hide that.
Yeah. It's a big boat.
Yes, indeed.
And you can go close to here to see a replica of it, sort of.
Yes.
It's that size. So kind of some points based on those verses that we looked at. And kind of one of the first ideas here is God's awareness of what is happening and God's awareness of sin and levels of corruption, depravity, wickedness, and also on the other hand, awareness of righteousness in the sense that, no human is perfect, but God sees the effort, at least in Noah's case. Noah was in a really terrible generation, and he was at least making some efforts to follow. And it
Yeah.
probably, I can't imagine that he was able to do it extremely well, but maybe he was.
I just think
Yeah,
it's fascinating that even back then when this was written, um, they had the concept of, blameless in his generation,
yeah, yeah.
even though there were a bunch of generations before, whatever. Before that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Um, and also the awareness of large scale. So you have kind of this contrast here because God's aware of the large scale situation on Earth and how humans are acting. But God is also at the same time aware of this individual guy called Noah. So that shows this. I guess that'd be more of a divine attribute, God being able to be aware of all of that at the same time. And I say at the same time, I guess I should share this other insight I had this week, and you might find it useful. In a lot of these instances where we see God showing emotion, and we kind of ask like, how is this? How is this possible? Well, if we're made in the image of God, and God is relational, and we are called to be relational beings, it would make sense that God would show emotion. And but it's different than our emotion, of course, because we're similar, but we're not God. We're made in the image, but we're not God. We're kind of a sort of a not a perfect reflection, but
Which version?
what's that?
If
Which
you ordered,
version?
if you got ordered God from wish.com.
Which version? Um, but some, and I said at the same time, so that kind of reminded me of this, that something we should always remember is that God is interacting with people in time, like interacting with Noah, showing sadness and um, regret, as it seems, which is interesting
Yeah.
in
I
this
have I'm
instance, but still being, still being above time and the ability to have the emotion in that moment, but also be above time, because God wouldn't be God if God was not above time, is kind of well, it's not something we can really wrap our heads around, but at the same time, just like if you're praying to God and you have a relationship with God and you're praying to God, you know that God is hearing you and communicating back with you through various means. How many millions of people at the same moment are also praying to God? And
Yeah,
it's
I have a.
something that,
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's a different thought. I don't want to cut you off on yours.
Oh, well, I was just saying that's kind of another example of how, because to God, it is not, to us, it seems like we're all praying at the same time, but we don't have God's perspective, because God has infinite time, so to speak. So it's not like it's not like if we were trying to do that, we'd be trying to pay attention to a million people at the same time. But God doesn't, God is above time, so it's not an issue.
What's that movie where the guy becomes God for a day or something, or a week
Oh
or something?
yeah, the emails,
Yeah, I can emails.
Bruce Almighty or something.
Bruce Almighty. Yep.
And the sequel's kind of a Noah thing too. It's like
Evan
there's a
Almighty.
sequel, and it's the guy builds an ark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
I had so on the topic of arcs and corrupted
yeah.
beings. What did the worms do? How were the worms corrupted?
Well, yeah, because it talks about the whole Earth,
Yeah.
and
And obviously I just picked a random example, but
the worm
you know, every living
it
being.
floated on the surface of the water.
Well, I mean, but then they would have brought two worms into the ark, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, worms are in all kinds of things, so they could easily fit in there, right?
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
think
it
I
is
think God.
interesting that phrase "all flesh is corrupted." So is it's kind of, I think it goes back to the whole our commandment in Genesis to be the overseers, or we're kind of the it seems like what humans do has an effect on, well, I mean, the fall caused creation to be corrupted, and in the fall in the garden caused sin to enter the picture, which corrupted creation itself. So that, I mean, in that case, it was already imperfect and corrupted, but also it's interesting to see this connection between the humans turning away from God even more, and then this whole thing about all flesh. Do you see this as referencing, where God says all flesh is corrupted, as being a reference to the fall and the result of that, or this result of this, all of this other stuff that's happened with the Nephilim running around? And the book of Enoch goes kind of into detail about the Nephilim running around and like causing a mess of things, and
Yeah.
then
Well,
you know
if you use the Book of Enoch to fill in the blanks here in the timeline of Genesis, then yes, certainly that is what happened. And since Genesis seems to use Enoch as a reference, and all for a lot of stuff already, just without detail, it makes sense to look at Enoch.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
definitely is a result of the fall, as a result of the Nephilim. Um, but I also had a potentially more interesting question because for me,
Okay.
the concept of Noah's Ark presents some logical challenges which I have difficulty forcing my way around mentally. Um, Such as like, did they get two bacteria? That kind of stuff. Um, but so for a lot of um, stories in the Bible, we choose to interpret them metaphorically, or maybe that's the right word, but it seems like metaphorically. What if we chose to interpret Noah's Ark metaphorically? What would it possibly mean? And the only thing I could come up with is something kind of cliche, like a catastrophic event in your life, like tearing away parts of your character or something that were corrupted. I don't know.
Well,
Long-winded question.
yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot. I mean, there is the one, there is the one question over the extent of the flood and the literal extent, if it was a global, or when they're saying the whole earth, if it was where humans were, because humans hadn't spread over the whole earth by this point. But then there's also the symbolic nature of the ark, which points to, I mean, the ark points to deliverance from, sin and corruption. So it is pointing to God's grace and saving people, saving a remnant, saving people. But also the whole idea of an ark is a very ancient. There's these are people who might not um, might not be Christians, but they talk about this whole idea of an ark and having foreknowledge and being prepared, and um, that there have been, and that this gets back to the whole global flood narratives that are out there in different cultures, that they point to. There was someone who was given, someone who was given foreknowledge of the impending disaster, and they prepared, and they were able to survive. Civilization, so to speak, human civilization was able to survive and, past this.
Yeah, maybe Noah was just a prepper.
He does kind of seem like a prepper here, doesn't he?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Like it was
but he
hard
was,
hard to dig back then, so they didn't have the concept of nuclear wars or zombies or anything, but floods might have been the apocalypse of the times.
yeah, I mean, the fire and water, right? Um, and yeah, it's an interesting topic, and
I said that
I
halfway in
have
jest, but yeah.
beliefs about, I have firm beliefs about certain things, but other things I'm a little more kind of speculative, like, well, maybe this could also be true.
Yeah.
As far as people surviving different kinds of cataclysms, and, going into caves, to survive a
Hmm.
asteroid impact or something like that, Um,
Yeah, well, I think there was some point. Well, this is maybe an alternative history. It depends on how you interpret the 7 days thing of creation, but like looking at how it seems like all humans were by the Ivory Coast for a long while. We all came from right there or something.
well, I know that's kind of been like kind of changing where they think, humans
Or I think that was actually
about.
that was I think that's where, because there is a constriction in like the genetic history. If you look at our genes and like, I don't know, I don't pretend to know understand how they really do it, but they can look at like the genetic history and look and see that there was like a major constriction at a certain point in time, and it seems like all the that was everyone, there were only like 300 humans maybe or something, and they all lived in the Ivory Coast like caves or something. Some big event happened, some world changing, I forget what it was, but
Well, then there's also the thoughts about the three sons of Noah, and their relationship to the. I guess, and I guess it depends on how you trace the genetics of humans, and like the three different. I want to say races, but like the three different. Like Noah's sons, each the three of them had different traits, physical traits, or something like that, and then you
oh,
see the tribes that it lists after the flood, and when people spread out after the Tower of Babel incident, and the names of the tribes of people and their association with the different sons, and you see some went up like into Eurasia, and then some went down into kind of Arabia and Africa, and then others went into. Oh, we lost Nathaniel.
Oh no.
Speaking of which, um, into Asia. You've heard of this theory, right, Bill?
Yeah.
Um, that everybody, we're kind of all a combination of these three different, and people, of course, intermixed, and you have different. It's not like you have three different, you know, distinct. Anyway, um, I don't want to get too out of my depth with that, but
Well, we're drifting away from our central theme here
right, right,
with uh, uh, in Genesis, where you know the the entire earth was tending toward what was just steeped in evil, except for Noah, and God was grieved.
yeah,
It hurt God, and even though he stood outside and he knew that before he ever created earth, he knew he was going to be grieved. He knew he was going to be upset. He still made this creation,
yeah,
and he brought it to this point, and he knew that he was going to have this one righteous person upon whom he could set this hope of leading humankind into a new future.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Um, I see this theme pop up over and over again in the. I mean, you see it over and over again in the Old Testament. You see it. I mean, you see it all the time. God's big plan and His will for the direction of history and the kingdom of God, is something that's going to happen. I mean, we still have free choice in our participation in it. whether we're against it or part of it, hopefully part of it. But you see the amount of people who are willing to be part of the plan or help in the plan, whether it's in this case, it's just one guy and his family. It comes down to that, and it seems like it's a very risky, I guess from our perspective, sometimes it seems like God's, like the mustard seed, it's something that could easily be like extinguished, but it isn't. And, or in the times of the Israelites, you had periods where the most of the nation was, turning away from God and worshiping idols, and you had a few faithful people. And yet it still came back, and just like, what was it, Elijah that, or he thought he was the only one, but there were others, right? I mean, was it Elijah that was, there's still 3,000 others who can't
Yeah.
remember the exact quote. Yeah. But it almost seems like God likes to work in that way. Like, it likes to work with us and invite us to be part of the kingdom and the work of the kingdom, but also that it's almost like it shows that no matter what we do, it's up to us if we want to be part of the kingdom of God and join in that work. But it's almost like God can do it with one person, or it's like the example in was it in the book of Joshua where they thinned they had a lot of people that were going to fight, and then God said, no, that's too many, and then they had them like drink water in a certain way, and the ones that could drink water in a certain way, like it ended up being just like 500 people or something like that. And and it said, the reason was that when it's just a few people and they defeat like a big army, it's not the strength of they didn't win because of their numbers or anything like that. They won because God wanted them to win. And that was part of the plan.
And it had to be shown that God was the one who acted.
Right. And I see that in this story, that it's, you get down to one guy and his family, and somehow God works through this one family and this one guy to do this huge task and is able to accomplish it. I mean, there's just a lot there to consider, both for us and just in looking at how God works.
Well, God
Because
knew
it is
that.
kind of, if you think about it, right? I mean,
Well, we have to remember also that God knew it was going to be like this from the beginning. And Noah proved to be righteous, and he allowed Noah and his family to be the start of what we have today. And he knew that this was going to be the launching point for what he was going to develop into what would become the family of Israel, to provide the Messiah and to provide the salvation for humankind. He had all that planned from the beginning.
but it's just very miraculous. I mean, it's just very kind of amazing that it's in this case, it comes down to sometimes it comes down to a few hundred people that choose to follow God in a certain time or generation. But in this case, it came down to just one guy and his family.
Yeah.
So it's just the most extreme example of this, I guess, is Noah. And well, I mean, I guess you
Absolutely.
could argue the same for all the prophecies that Jesus had to fulfill to be the Messiah, that, the prophecies in the Old Testament and all the different things that had to happen, that somehow they all happened, you know. Um, anyway, it's just that God working and through the big events, and then also the individuals and their choices, and um, it's interesting. Um, so we did kind of touch on that whole thing of, well, this was actually a good segue, because my next point was, we get down to one person faithfully seeking to walk with God, as it says here. It's interesting that we mentioned this last time, that Enoch, it said Enoch walked with God. But then here it does say Noah walked with God also. Um, and God noticed this one person, set him apart, and he hid him away, or whether that's he was literally hiding, building this massive thing, or if he, maybe there was some kind of cloaking thing going on where people couldn't see the ark, but it was, what was that movie where they had the building that people couldn't see? I'm probably going
Uh,
off on a tangent here, but um,
I don't know.
anyway, they made a building invisible that was there, that no, anyway, but so I wonder how
I
much.
mean, that's the beginning of Star Trek Insurrection, sort of.
No, it wasn't that. It was a movie about, like, it was a movie about ESP and the anyway. I won't spend time trying to figure out the title of the movie, but um so, but whatever happened, Noah was set apart, just kind of like Enoch was set apart in a different way, but they both walked with God. They were both standing out in their generation and set apart for a special task.
Well, um,
Yeah.
something that I feel like I'm observing here is, like, you have two motivations, two ways of being motivated to lead a righteous life, right? As defined by the Bible. And that would be like fear of the consequences of going to hell, but also, and arguably more importantly, that um like a positive direction would be to, walk closely with God, right? Develop your relationship with God.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that kind of the fact that that is emphasized a lot, along with the fact that it's emphasized, it's what differentiates these two people. It's not that they were necessarily more afraid of hell or something than other people. It's that they walk more closely with God. That sort of is the same as, like, saying, like, I don't want to say like focus on the positives, but like kind of move towards positive direction, instead of, like, maybe it's saying, like, you must make a conscious effort to uh, move towards positive directions instead of just moving away from negative ones.
I kind of see that. Yeah. Um, and the whole, you could see the building of the ark. I mean, that was done out of like faith and obedience. I mean, there was a disaster that he was warned about, but he hadn't. That's kind of like he didn't see it yet. So I mean, it was kind of a this flood's coming and it's going to cover everything you see around you. But it wasn't like happening right then when he was building the ark. It was everything was just kind of status quo, and
Well, and he did it
it was
because
through
God
that
told him.
action that he was saved from the consequences of the flood, right?
Right.
So it's interesting. I mean, it's building an ark's a very proactive thing. I think
Yeah.
it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Um,
Be like
and there
Noah.
wasn't. I mean, there is a lesson in Noah too that you have to build. I heard somebody say it once. It was kind of interesting, and this is a very practical thing. It's not necessarily that deep, but you have to build the ark before the rain starts, or you have to prepare before you have to because if he started building the ark when the flood was starting, then it would be too late. Yeah.
Yeah. Is this like success is preparedness and meeting
Right.
opportunity or something like that?
Yeah, and then he probably looked like crazy person building this boat when there wasn't
Yeah.
water around, right? So
Yeah. Then there
um
wasn't anyone else to have an opinion.
right, that's true. So take with that what you will. um and I see a foreshadowing here with this ark. And Bill and I had talked about how God was saving. This kind of happens over and over again in the Old Testament and throughout the Bible, that God, you get down to like a small remnant of people, and God works through that small remnant of people to keep things going, basically. But you can kind of see the ark as pointing to God's work in saving us from sin, and that it's pointing to Jesus. And also if you look at if you look at Christianity today, there are billions of people who at least claim to be Christian. I mean, how many of them actually are is a different question. But it all began with this. Jesus had 12 disciples who were these fishermen who were some of them were Matthew was a tax collector, but most of them were kind of uneducated, I guess you would say. And people, the religious leaders were kind of astounded by that. But it wasn't a massive group of people. That I mean, Jesus did have crowds that were following him from time to time, but the very beginning, I mean, it was not millions of people. It wasn't even 1,000 people, especially right after the resurrection. But 2,000 years later, I see a fist, a yellow fist. Are you raising your hand, or is that
It's just a thumbs up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the thumbs up there. So it's just kind of interesting that you have this theme that keeps cropping up. You have this tiny remnant of people, and in this case, in Noah's case, it's one man and his family. And well, in the case of Jesus, it is one, the Messiah, it is one man, but then also this small band of followers that weren't, there weren't a lot of like, there were a couple of rich, influential people that followed Jesus, and there was like Nicodemus who followed him sort of semi secretly, and but it wasn't like a big, powerful movement or group of people from the outside. It was kind of like that.
Yeah, there. So to summarize that, it might be something like, and I don't mean to steal any with thunder, but like there seem to be a lot of examples in the Bible of an individual's actions making a difference.
Yeah, or small group,
Yeah.
God working through some kind of small group
Yeah.
and it having a really outsized effect. And we were talking about that instance in the book of Joshua of do you remember who they were fighting or what? I know we kind of just mentioned it a while back, but do you remember who they were fighting? Were they fighting the Amalekites or somebody like that, or
I don't remember.
they were going into battle and they had a large force, and God told Joshua like it's too many people, um, so they sent most of them away, and then there were just like a few thousand of them left, and then like, oh, that's too many people. So they narrowed it down to like 500 men or something like that. And then God told Joshua, okay, like with these, with this small force, I'm going to defeat this big army. And the reason being that, you'll know it wasn't because of your own strength that you won. It was, because I'm with you, basically. So I
Is
do
that where
kind of
they
see
like
the
charged in with a thing with or
with the
maybe I don't know.
That
With
wasn't when they broke the lanterns, was it? Or was it, I'm thinking of the
that when they
Walls of
charged
Jericho
in with like
movie.
a holy object and then
Oh, the Ark of
the
the
enemy
Covenant.
force knew
Yeah.
that God was with them and they ran away.
Well,
Something
yeah,
like that.
they did bring the Ark into battle.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there we go.
and there is an instance, I think, in it was during the time of Samuel, so I think it was in First Samuel. But anyway, so they trotted the Ark out, and it was kind of like it wasn't. But God, they trotted the Ark out as like this
Trotted it.
rabbit like a rabbit's foot or like a secret weapon or something. They're like, all right, we have the ark, we're going to win now. So they were kind of focused on the object, and they weren't really. This was at a time where they weren't really focused on God. They were just kind of like, okay, we're going to win the battle, so let's bring the ark out. And then God allowed the ark to get captured, and that's like a whole story there. But anyway, so yeah, the ark, yeah, that's well, yeah, they would have had the ark at the time of Joshua because uh, is there any connection between, and I should know this, but ark, the word ark, when we're talking about Noah's ark, and the word like Ark of the Covenant,
I mean, it's
is
still the
there?
container,
It's a container. Yeah.
right?
Is the Hebrew word the same, Bill, or do you know, or Nathaniel, do you know, is the Hebrew, or are
I
we just
don't
translating
know.
them both into ark English?
I don't know.
Because that can't be, if it's the exact same word, that has to be some sort of, you know, flag there to pay attention to this sort of thing. Uh,
Hmm.
I would think so, because build an ark, God tells Noah to build an ark, then God tells Moses to build to have the ark built. What was Bezalel that built the ark, right? He built the tabernacle and all the stuff in
Oh,
it. So,
didn't know that.
oh yeah, good trivia knowledge there for you. Um, so yeah, but just to kind of wrap it up with a couple of thoughts. Uh, God desires for individuals and humans as a whole to do well and to prosper. But this is founded, of course, on our relationship with God and not just, because if you go back to the Watchers giving the tech, it might have seemed good on the outset, um, but without that connection to God's wisdom, it didn't really help humans to know how to make metal weapons and to do all this other stuff because they ended up using it to, do bad things with, basically. So we have this choice whether, and you were talking about it, mentioned this earlier, that they basically have this choice to choose to walk with God, out of the trust that that is the best way, or to, or the other choice, which is what most of the people did in this generation, as we see here, to kind of go our own way. And, those are kind of the two choices there. But, God could have easily wiped everybody out, but he still chose to. He still was looking for that, those faithful people, even though they just found one, Noah, that was enough. Um, so our individual choices matter, and that's not to say the choices of the collective doesn't matter, but I mean that matters too. But also the individual choices matter. Um, so what will we choose? That is the question. Well, do we have any other thoughts here? It's weird not being cut off every 40 minutes. I wonder if that's a good thing that we're cut off every 40 minutes, or
It did seem to provide a little bit of structure,
yeah,
actually.
yeah, that is
Uh,
true.
I just was sitting here thinking that it's interesting how it is somewhat a common theme in the Bible, or at least it comes up a few different times. And to my knowledge, no, well, the Tower of Babel, that's one, um, but this anti-technology theme, and this Book of Enoch is very strong in that regard, as far as the Nephilim giving technology and that being the source of corruption, which I don't think I can
Or
really argue
the
with.
Watchers.
But yes, oh, the Watchers. Um, yes, that's true. The Watchers, yeah. Um, the Nephilim were the products of the Watchers and the human women. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting for a couple of different reasons. Because one, um, maybe that's a big reason why that book was taken out of another reason why that book was taken out of the Bible, or maybe I'm misstating facts or what. But
Well, I mean, you could say that the Ark was technology, right?
yeah, but my point was something like during the Renaissance or something. It seems likely that they might have been like, oh wait, we don't want to have a quite so strong anti-technology stance anymore.
Well,
Um,
the Book of Enoch does have some stuff in it that I could see rubbing authorities the wrong way. If that makes
hmm. Yeah, and then
um
well, I had a second point before I forget.
yeah.
Um, if that hasn't happened already. Um, the anti-technology thing. Oh yeah, just that does seem biologically accurate. As far as like technology does. Well, I said this last time, I think maybe, but as much as I love technology, it does seem to be uh I don't want to say that it doesn't make people happier, but um it presents greater challenges, like great challenges to like kind of integrating itself with the way humans seem to function
Yeah.
mentally,
Yeah.
because we're not really designed for technology.
Yeah.
We're designed to like, yeah, technology pokes at our temptations.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned the Tower of Babel because that, I mean, we will be talking about that event, but it's something as innocuous as seeming as the ability to build a tall structure, and then it seems like pride slips in, and what they say is let's make a name for ourselves, and we'll build it up to heaven, and it's almost like this. They turn this ability to do this, build this high, whether it was a ziggurat or what it was, they
Mm-hmm.
kind of get these big ideas just because they realized how to do it, and then that's what causes the problem is them having these like, let's make a name for ourselves and we can be, yeah. Anyway, so
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people throughout history have attempted to make a name for themselves. Why do we pick out just them building a tall structure as the epitome of evil?
well, it was a symbol of like,
No, thinking themselves like greater than God or something.
yes, because they're like, we're going to build it up to heaven, and
Oh, yes, that's right.
that statement, and it's anyway. Um, and it is one note about the technology that the Watchers gave the humans. If you look at the Book of Enoch, it says later on, like, when God was sending Enoch with the message for the Watchers, he said, like, you only knew the worthless secrets and you gave them the worthless stuff. I didn't even let you have the good stuff. So it's kind of, I always found that kind of amusing, that the
Well, maybe we could negotiate with the Watchers again for some fusion technology
maybe.
and faster than light travel. That'd be cool.
Well, that was probably the good stuff they weren't given, right? So, well, I guess then that concludes this evening's discussion. Noah Part 1, we will be looking at the flood. Well, not the whole flood, not all the things that happened, but there is an interesting, at least one interesting verse in there when Noah's in the ark with his family and the animals and all that, that it said, and God remembered Noah. It says that in there. God remembered Noah, and then, so it was after like 40 days, it says God remembered Noah. Like, so,
Oh yeah, that Noah guy. I almost
yeah,
forgot.
I the guy I told to build the boat. Just the way it's worded, it kind of is interesting. Um, so we will look at that next time. So it'll be Noah Part 2, and then there might be a Part 3 to Noah's story. I'll have to look at the exact, because we are focusing still on that, and we'll be in this theme for a while. The uh, Humanity of God series, and so that concludes this evening's discussion. Any last words? Any last words? No?
No,
All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we will be back with more stuff. So have a good week.